So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Ellis.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian, and ladies and gentlemen, pleasure to be here. Mike and I, from the UK column, have produced the most up-to-date briefing that we can possibly deliver within the time frame here at AV. And the subject is, we think, fundamental to the overall gambit of trying to achieve some kind of global government, global currency, and it would naturally fit clearly with what we've found, that global military is also hand in glove with that objective. So we're seeing the stepping stones here with this process that we're going through, despite the fact that the government is telling us that we're leaving the EU. So the majority of all of this activity has accelerated dramatically since the vote. Just slightly before the vote, information was withheld by the EU prior to the Brexit vote. We found that nobody within the vote leave arrangement, no matter what we went in with, whether that be an admiral or whatever, would take any notice and wouldn't put it on the agenda. So it's very much withheld from the general public. Now, there's one thing I can't stand, and that's hypocrisy. So to say then that we were leaving customs union, whilst on the other hand knowing full well in complete parliamentary silence that we were going into defence union, flies in the face of any kind of integrity whatsoever. So we're going to just go through the journey very quickly. So there's a romantic notion here with the unification, the reunification of Europe. So I'm going to start from the perspective of this gentleman, Cicero, who said that the sinews of war are infinite money. So thereby, if you wish to wage perpetual war, does this sound familiar? You would need some way of doing infinite money. Well, of course, back in the Roman days, they would have had to have paid their legionnaires in silver and gold. Of course, at some points, they run out of that, and of course, the legionnaires, well, we're not fighting. Well, we're off. When you've got some more money, let us know, you know. Well, of course, we've got this system now. The fiat system, it's limitless. And the global central banking network that's almost complete, there's only a few countries that still exist that don't run a central banking network. Of course, you can just keep going with this, as of course the US is. It's how much do you just keep printing it? There's no end. So perpetual war, this guy here really, I think probably, as a senior statesman and obviously quite clever, had sort of perhaps initiated the global banking system as we know it by this comment, I think. So now we move into the sort of relative present time, and this is sort of how, from my perspective as an engineer, putting together some commentary from a terrific admiral called Sandy Woodward, who led the task force down to the South Atlantic, saying in 2010 that Britain could no longer defend the Channel, which, as far as I'm concerned, I will take that from him, and my ears pricked up as an engineer as I see engineering annihilated in the Midlands. So I come across this when I start to do my research, and this is the first decent nugget of this is very serious. So Averell Harriman was a very, very senior banker, and he was head of the Marshall Fund in Europe. He was the chief attaché from America to Japan and from America to Europe. So he's a bit of a, you know, wise old man, as he was referred to. But this is the first reference that we see to the correct terminology. Unification. This is the important phrasing that we've got to get to grips with. Unitary authority, union, unify, unification. And there's the recipe: economic, military union, and final political unity. Obviously, there would be a treasury to administer, and there would therefore be tax. And this is where it concerns everyone, because it will be pan-EU tax as a result. So, hands up. Who remembers the draft? Conscription, the draft? Okay. I'm going to submit that this is on the agenda, all right? We may well see it in our lifetime. So this is Ernest Bevin. So we've got some decent stuff from this guy, 1948. It's a bit of a crucial period. And he's talking about the consolidation of Europe, but obviously it's the unification of Europe. He's used a slightly different word. And he's talking about the Five Powers Treaty, which was the first defence union. And the Cabinet Office papers that we've got, they're genuine. You can go on the UK Column site and look at them. Articulate really what the overall plan is and has been in the engine room of our government for decades. Despite who you vote for, despite what's on the manifesto, any democratic sort of attempts, the engine room is tasked and designated in the Cabinet Office, so it's like a government within the government, that's actually the government, is doing this. It is unifying Britain. The wording they used in the papers is integrate. Well, of course, integrate's not really unifying. They probably had a bit of a, let's not call it that. Maybe we can't get away with it under the Constitution. So they're very careful with the wordsmithing. And as General Peter Zwack, who used to be the military attaché in Moscow, said to me, words are important and they count. Make sure you use the right word. So it's a bit of a key thing. So this is the actual, one of the documents that's talking about the details going on in the Cabinet Office, you know, really regardless of what the MPs are doing. So on my travels in and out of Parliament, I've met lots of very interesting people, from Lord Tebbit, Ian Duncan Smith, Jacob Rees-Mogg, all the usual characters, Colonel Bob Smith, numerous generals, chiefs of defence staff, and a lot of this detail that I was coming in with, absolutely no idea. They had no idea. So this particular paper, go onto the UK Column and come back to it if you want, but this actually sets the table for where we are now, because it's talking about Defence Union in 1948. And they've been busily, clearly, in the Cabinet Office, beavering away at this objective for, as I said, decades. So, EU Defence Union, okay? This is what we're dealing with. We are not, I repeat, not dealing with a European army, okay? This is some of the interaction that I had with Deborah Haynes, and this is what it produced. Effectively putting David Cameron and his government on the front page of the Times several times. And this is the most interesting one. Post a conversation, editorial time was booked, and this is what went up. Britain to block EU army, okay? And then conveniently, a picture of Nigel Farage. Very conveniently. This term is an erroneous term. Don't use it. It's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the unification, our national military, ours, that you've all paid for with your tax, that all of our dads, granddads, mums, everybody, uncles, aunties, have all invested in more ways than one, blood, sweat and tears. It's our defence, our military, Her Majesty's Armed Forces, being unified along with all the other nations in Europe into one single point command and controlled operation of all defence and security services in the EU zone. So that includes Navy. For Britain and France, that's a nuclear force. We'll come on to that shortly. Royal Marines, Paras, Air Force, Army, the lot, GCHQ, and it keeps going. It doesn't stop. It's an all-encompassing concept. So it even comes down into policing. So highly relevant, obviously, with the lady that we've got from France today. So it's very important. Do not engage with anybody formally, if we're going to try and campaign on this, on the basis of EU army. That is not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with Defence Union. My objective here today is to try and get you to be comfortable with that phrase, have a bit of understanding, and be able to talk to people when you go away, particularly veterans at the moment that are being persecuted legally for doing their jobs as the government has asked them to do. And I believe that this is fundamentally what we've got to do, is join up the Defence Union aspect of what's really going on with the persecution of the veterans into one campaigning frame. So we'd view the whole problem, not bits of the problem, we view the whole problem. So as we can see here, that This is an official EU document, and they're talking about the pillars of this arrangement all have to work together, otherwise it won't work. And this is the diagram. This is the EU's own handiwork. And they're articulating here the componentry that makes up Defence Union. See the title at the top of the portico of the graphic? European Defence Union. Okay? So all of these pillars of componentry make up effectively their MOD. So we'll break those down. So cards on the table. CARD is the Europeans' way of conducting the reviews. Okay? They're going to conduct, and even if we have in Britain a defence review of what we're going to do or not going to do, the EU are going to mark off on it. They're going to mark our homework. Okay? Coordinated annual review, or whatever, coordinated reviews, or whatever the period is. So they're doing the reviewing. So the whole thing is closed-looped in terms of the capital and operational budgets. It's closed-looped. So all the contracts for whatever they're going to do in terms of manufacturing will all be closed-looped to the EU. So in terms of the procurement and the manufacturing, we can't really sort of break this down without looking at this. So the first steps I'm submitting for this process were the Sandys Review in 1957, where we took a whole conglomerate, they came for the aircraft first, a whole conglomerate of British companies and amalgamated, we unified so many, a dozen-odd aircraft companies all into one that's now BAE, where they made all these terrific things at the time. TSR-2, right, well, you're not having that, that's too good, as Roland Beaumont well knew when he flew it. So we used to make a load of stuff in this country. We had manufacturing, we had jobs, we had stability, apprenticeships, and some sort of whatever. This was the step change arrangement in the whole Defence Union program. Wasn't really articulated properly. Here we have Concorde. Okay, an Anglo-French arrangement. The world's most fantastic aircraft. We were supposed to make 100 and odd of them, and we only ended up making 11 in Britain, I think 7 in France, something like that. And Michael Heseltine was actually the salesman for this. And hands up, ladies and gentlemen, how many did he sell? None. So I refuse, under any circumstances, to take anything from that man. Okay, so this is the result of the 57 review. It's the Panavia Tornado. It's the first European joint-built, joint-manufactured aircraft. It was, frankly, at the cost of all the British engineering and the British aircraft and all that diversity that we had, the industrial diversity, the industrial capacity, absolutely wiped out, and we end up with this, okay? And here we have, this is the European fighter for the European Air Force. It is not an RAF Tornado, Typhoon. That's what it is. Jagdflugzeug, Airbus, okay? There's a portion of BAE that's involved with the manufacture of it, but of course it's nothing like what we had previously when we made other aircraft all on our own. Okay, so we're going to have another review. So the reviews are quite crucial because they're the mechanism as to how we get away with all this. That's how they've been doing it. And this diagram here since World War II articulates the defence spending GDP, and this is, we think, really the step change to focus on is the 1981 Knott Review. John Knott, Maggie Thatcher, and of course we had the Falklands immediately after. It didn't seem to matter what happened there. This process of continuing to cut, so the cutting, you've heard that, defence cuts, it's not what they were, that's a unification process. All right? If we want to unify all of these national militaries into one force, it was very important that it was all got to some kind of acceptable rate of exchange, like the currency with the ERM, that there was an exchange rate mechanism for defence, and this is part of it. This is sort of showing us what's going on. So despite what anybody did democratically, this process is carried on from the Cabinet Office and the Treasury. So the NATO question, a lot of MPs that I've lobbied, oh, NATO, and they bang on about it like it's a safety rope, and this is going to save us. Well, what will save us is our forces. Whether they're in NATO or whatever they're in, it can only be viewed from a national perspective if we wish to stay as a country. So I'm submitting, without a national force, are we a country? No, I agree, we're not. So the NATO question. This is wonderful, isn't it? Even they're damned even by their own petard. So NATO is a core pillar of EU defence union. You cannot view NATO as, it's okay, you know, although, you know, clearly, you know, a lot of the perpetration has been done through the glove of NATO. So that's a separate debate, all right? I'm not endorsing any of this stuff. We're just sort of having a briefing. But this is a key pillar of defence union. So it's in. Defence union, NATO, NATO defence union. Can't view it as separate. So now we've got Freddie Howe, one of the ministers in the Lords, keep coming up against this guy, and we see this mantra come out all the while that they want us to try and accept, you know, that we're not going to have duplication with NATO. They like to anchor this thing, and whenever we get people to, you know, to write into their MP, we see this a lot. This is the standard rebuttal, because we've not come in at unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of people still going in with the EU army angle, all right? And of course, it's easy for the politicians to bat that away because, well, that's not real, that doesn't exist. So the Cabinet Office that seem to be generating these template letters, so we've had this before with when the PESCO arrangements were floated some time ago, we saw that they were sending us a template letter regardless of who wrote in from wherever in the country, and when we fielded all the information, it was the same letter from whatever MP with the same content. So saying the same mantra, duplication with NATO. Well, NATO's in defence union. So this is, you know, this is absolute tosh. So, here we go.
Very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves.
Frankly, this is the revelation, isn't it? Their faces. They say it all, don't they? You know, how on earth did Trump get them to line up there? So, line up, stand still, and I'm going to give you a real good telling off. You're not. We want this money. We want this money because Lockheed and Boeing, you know, we're going to make America great again. So I find this is the, you know, what can you say? It says it all, but ultimately he's articulating about the money, coming back to the money again, all right, and collective defence. It would have been, if you think, it would have been a very different story if he'd said for defence union what that would have done, but of course he hasn't done that. So here we have Mr. Stoltenberg again, who's going to.
Really looking forward to meet the EU defence ministers, and in a few weeks, in the beginning of December, High Representative Federica Mogherini will attend the NATO Foreign Ministerial meeting, and I think this just reflects the unprecedented level of close cooperation between NATO and the European Union. I have welcomed EU efforts on defense many times because I believe that projects such as European military mobility, European Defence Fund, PESCO, all of that can contribute to fair burden sharing within NATO. It can complement NATO, and it can also help to develop new military capabilities and also address the fragmentation of the European defence market.
So there we go. He's talking about unprecedented levels of cooperation. Really what he means is defence union. Okay, it's a lovely way of wordsmithing out something so nobody actually gets the impact moment. And I know this is factual inaccurate, because if in the vox popping that we've done on this, if you say to someone, so we play devil's advocate with it, if we say to someone, what's your opinion on European army? That's nothing to do with us, we're leaving. What? You know? If you say to someone, you know, how do you feel about being in defence union? What? No, no chance. And a lot of people that are probably on the service-orientated side of the campaign, over my dead body is normally what I get told. We're not doing that, because everybody's aware of currency union, customs union. These are the mantras that the politicians are quite happy to use, but there seems to be this incredible resistance at that end of our political frame to not use it. So it's up to us to force them to use it. So he's articulated there, and of course he's now talking about the new amount of contracting and weaponry and more money cycles again for what's going to be EU procurement. So here we have Ursula von der Leyen, she's German defence minister. We had a wonderful scoop some time ago. We're on our sort of daily sift on Twitter, because some of this stuff gets hemorrhaged beautifully on Twitter. We found a German government tweet using the term defence union. It was the first time it had been used openly. So it was an official German government tweet. We put it out. There was a great deal of resistance among some of the other sort of Leave groups, whatever Leave side they were, because there's a warren of them now, isn't there? There's so many, it's almost impossible to keep up. But essentially, we think they taper to one point. To use the Germans are now talking about defence union. Come on, you know, it's official. So eventually it came out, and that's really was the turning point last year for the awareness campaign. So this is what you've got to say.
Our collective defense, we are ironclad committed to NATO. NATO of 29, that is collective defense Article 5. But there are problems and issues where I do not see NATO, but Europe has to be able to act.
That though this transatlantic alliance with America is extremely important and we need to maintain it,
listen,
the best partnership is a partnership where we have our own capabilities that are also strong.
I was talking about Africa. This is not a typical place for NATO. We are very committed to NATO and other places, but Africa is a place where we need to be able to act as Europeans.
For example, one of the things that my institute does is work in Africa, and at the moment we're particularly focused on the Sahel group of countries. That's that band of countries across the north part of sub-Saharan Africa, where you've got exploding populations, dire poverty, radicalization and extremism. We may well face the next wave of migration and extremism from those countries. It makes perfect sense for Europe to have the military capability to help those countries with their security.
And for that, we created the European Defence Union, right, to have a comprehensive approach with diplomacy, economic development, and the military means.
So there you go, there's the snapshot. There's all the key factors there, straight from the horse's mouths. Africa, NATO, but there are problems and issues, and we want to go into Africa. So there's the intervention policy already. So as if, I mean, obviously there was a huge amount of resistance to Iraq, all the people marching, but as we saw with Syria, and as Brian articulated beautifully, what was the most effective way with the Syrian thing, we understand, was the formal letters to your MPs. Okay, we might not like Parliament, you might not like MPs, I've spent a great deal of time in there, I can understand that. But as an instrument, it is the only instrument available to the people to do anything about this. And that's a quote from an admiral who used to run Trident, to me. So this is the, you know, the Syrian model is really what we've then got to go forward with in order to hold this up. Because clearly, there's already a gambit to go into Africa. So here we have Barnier, who wrote a lot of the Defence Union script in the deal.
In this context, diplomacy, defence, development and cooperation with other parts of the world, first and foremost Africa, are the most powerful ways of leveraging the European Union as an international player.
So really what he's talking about here is empire, because this is the language that Macron is now using, and empires really tend to only do one thing. And there is really the historical precedent and the historical frame. This is why I started the briefing from that point of view. So we can see, this is the guy that's written, you know, co-written Theresa May and the Sedwell script currently that's supposed to be leaving. No, we're not. So here we have Guy Verhofstadt again, and he's saying, you know, they love using the NATO thing, but as European defence, all right? So we're coming back to the single point command and control aspect. So at the moment, if you think it's bad enough, which I can understand, that where we are at the moment with the British military and Parliament, if you think that that status is bad, how bad is this going to be? It's going to be horrific. And if there isn't the resistance now to pull this up, what's going to happen in the future is going to be absolutely awful. This is what the EU considers as their neighbourhoods. This is the EU's neighbourhood. Okay, there's some interesting stuff on here. Belarus, Ukraine. Okay, there's only one thing going to happen there in the short space of time. Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and we've got all of the African things that all of those key, those players and actors in the EU are already articulating. They're going to go into Africa. So this is the game plan, ladies and gentlemen. All right, this is the schematics, and that's the Roman map. It's not dissimilar, is it? So the bilateral defence agreements that Britain already has in place are a key pillar to defence union. So at the moment, there's been since immediately before Brexit, post-Brexit to now, there's been an enormous amount of bilateral defence treaties signed, and interestingly with Germany and a lot of the other big players. So the bilateral agreements, so that's nation to nation, form part of defence union. And this is by their own graphic. So these are some of the bilateral arrangements that are currently existing between Britain and other countries in Europe. So you can see that they're going to take ownership of these. There's going to be some kind of transfer of undertakings with these bilateral relationships. It's a given at the moment, bearing in mind we seem to have the current sort of defence staff talking about that Her Majesty's Armed Forces are one force. So they're not viewing them really anymore as Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, Paras, and so on and so forth. They're just viewing it as one force. There's this one force fusion approach. So this is what they now refer to as a patchwork. What he means by patchwork is nations. So he's saying he doesn't see the nation. He's just absolutely no regard. He's got a patchwork, as if it's a problem to be solved. This is a meeting that took place. This film was actually done covertly, and it was passed to me from somebody inside the Conservative Party that works as a parliamentary researcher. And they gave it to me and said, "What do you think of this? Have a look."
Text of the Lancaster House Treaty, you will find words in there, this is bilateral obviously, about how neither party can conceive of circumstances in which the vital interests of one was threatened without the vital interests of the other party being equally engaged. Now this is code. This is code for saying, meddle with him and you've got to reckon with our nuclear capability as well. So that's the sort of Anglo-French dynamic. And I think that would and could and should probably have been extended towards the rest of continental Europe unless, of course, Trump is impeached or we believe that he's going to be house-trained, which is, I guess...
Did you catch the key part? No, partway through the speech. This is Nick Whitney, a government nuclear deterrent advisor. This meeting is at RUSI, which is funded by the EU. It is the top government think tank for defence. So it really ought to be called UC, EU Service Institute, because that's who's paying the bills and dictating policy, clearly. Nick Whitney said there that our nuclear deterrent could and should be extended into the EU. This is what these people are thinking. Now, ironically, everybody's sold independent nuclear deterrent. Now, just so we can frame this correctly, I'm not talking about whether the debate of whether we should have nuclear weapons. That is not the debate that I'm engaging in. The debate I'm engaging in is the status here and now is that these people are thinking and talking and reiterating within their circles, their professional circles, that our nuclear deterrent could and should be extended into the EU. They're green lighting it. It's okay. This is the go-to gang for MPs. MP that might have a load of questions about nuclear deterrent, where do they go? These guys. The nuclear deterrent was agreed to be renewed prior to the Brexit vote. Anybody see a pattern? So, this isn't going to be cheap. There's a bill, okay? There will be a bill. It's not for free. And hand in glove with the Defence Union is an EU Treasury to administer the money. An EU Treasury will tax. It has to recover the money in the circle.
Tajani, members of the European Parliament. As you know, I am obsessed by unity. This obsession was with me during last European Council, but in fact it has been with me since the first days of my work in Brussels. Following the publication of the 5 Presidents' report, no one should have any doubts what we need to do. Everything is crystal clear. The problem is member states' conflicting interests. One of the first effects of the leaders' agenda is the agreement to find potential solutions in the nearest possible future despite these differences. I will do everything in my power to take the first very concrete steps by June towards establishing the European Monetary Fund and strengthening the stability of the banking union. I still believe that it is possible. In June, it will become clear if I am an incurable optimist. But one thing I can promise you today. If we don't reach agreement by June, I will say precisely why it wasn't possible and who is responsible.
Make no bones about it. They want banking union, monetary union, EU Treasury, EU taxation. And the two things are happening hand in glove simultaneously as the Harriman concept. I've always had a tremendous regard for Ireland because one of the gentlemen that started me on my journey in 2010 was a 4th generation Ulsterman, an engineer of extreme capability. I had the good fortune of working with him in Coventry, and he would have people direct from Lockheed Skunk Works come to him directly to do specialist work. And my company was very lucky that we didn't only have a drinking relationship with each other, but we had a working relationship as well. And Nat demonstrated to me exactly what was going on at the engineering side and the industrial side of this Defence Union arrangement, and he was very, very, very passionate about the problems, and the language that he used at the time was, I won't be able to repeat it here on camera, you can well imagine, but a very, very well-motivated Irishman.
I value Ireland's neutrality. I was a soldier in the army for 12 years, and I couldn't be more against the idea of a European army. One of the reasons I joined the army is I love the country, I love Ireland. And if Ireland needs its sons and daughters to defend it, that's one thing. But to defend the EU, which is a massive bureaucratic organisation, is an entirely separate thing. The Europe that we were sold was a cooperative group of nations that were getting together for peaceful cooperation and trade. And what Europe has always intended to be, or at least the European Commission has always intended Europe, or the EU to be, was a political and military union. And what they're trying to create is a federal superstate that will rival the United States in terms of military power. the European Union was trying to get Ireland to sign the second Lisbon Treaty, they made certain promises to us. One of them was that they wouldn't interfere with our ability to set our own tax rates, and the other was they would respect our neutrality. So they've broken, in recent months, they've indicated that they're going to break both of those promises. In terms of our tax rate, the EU Commission has stated that they want to bring in what's called a common consolidated corporate tax rate, which would allow them to set our corporation tax rate, which is something the EU has had its eye on for a long time. So that was, the first promise was they wouldn't interfere with our tax rate, they're breaking it. And the second promise was they would respect our neutrality. So on that front, in recent months, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron have mentioned that they want to create an EU army, which is what they would consider vital to the creation of a federal EU or an EU superstate that would rival the United States. The way that they've introduced this is they've started saying that the EU needs to be able to defend itself against potential future enemies. And in one of the sentences, they actually mentioned the United States as a potential enemy, and they mentioned Russia. The response from most Irish leaders has been what the response from almost every Irish leader in the past has been, which is just to roll over and give the EU whatever it wants.
This is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. We've got somebody on a Democratic end of the job wanting to talk about it, and it's really given the best that I've seen so far from anybody wishing to come in on a Democratic mandate, save two things. So Gemma, if you're in the audience, or anybody here that's able to feed this back, it is not a European army, it's Defence Union. That's vital. They are not creating anything that doesn't already exist as a national military. They are unifying your military. They're not creating. I hear this a lot of time. Despite whoever I've tried to brief to get to talk about this, they get the phraseology wrong, and it's very, very important because the reaction from the general public is vital that we get the correct wording for this stuff. So, as I said before, the concept is one of single-point command and control. Okay? And I know that because Norman Tebbit told me face-to-face in a private meeting, because Maggie was asked for it in 1984. She was asked for, they called it military union back then, they didn't call it defence union, but let's say it's the same thing. She was asked for three things. She was asked for currency union, military union, and loss of the national veto, the same recipe as we're now seeing now. So this has been kept secret. Why on earth didn't you talk about this? This is an outrage from the main parties, and I'm going to submit some very important anecdotal comments that were made to me from the most senior admiral that run Trident. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because Trident is funded direct from the Treasury. It's not really run through government. It's a bit like the way the SAS is managed. It doesn't really go through government per se. It gets its money direct from the Treasury. And this particular admiral, on the basis of the successes that I'd had trying to get defence spending in the mainstream press, and obviously the wall coming down when I tried to get them to talk about Defence Union, we had a series of sort of private meetings. I can't name him for obvious reasons, okay? And what he said to me was, at the meetings that they took place when he took over the accounts, there's huge amounts of money involved, the meetings take place at the Treasury. And this is what happened. This was what was reiterated to me. So I'm quite happy to take what this man said to me as the truth. That the initial meeting come in and a huge bundle of money is going to be signed off in terms of billions. So it goes from the Treasury to the Admiral, and the Admiral then gets on with it. Okay, so there's a bit of a ritual handover. At this point, the Treasury guys, very, very senior, and the Bank of England people that are in there, right, they'll be here in a minute. So this guy's thinking, what do you mean? They'll be here in a minute. It's all right. Just... In comes the chief Tory whip, in comes chief Labour whip together. And on the desk is, in front of the Treasury guy, is two sets of papers. Forgive the props. So they don't look at the whips. They're not spoken to. They're not, hello, name, how you doing? No, nothing. Head down. That's for you. That's for you. Off you go. And that's how it was articulated to me. So I hope you can all see what happened there. That at the very point our democratic interface should be at its most powerful, it is its most weakest. Because the script for what the MPs were going to be told to do by the whips was simultaneously issued from one point. That's your script, off you go. So that, because obviously this guy is a parliamentarian, a lot of them are, the Admiral, all right? They believe in parliamentary control, all right, and democratic control, that when you vote, you know, the MPs give you your sovereignty back at the end of the term, and you then have a go. If you don't like what they've been doing, we have another one. There's no option under the EU for that. The EU is a dictatorship. So the defence fund, the money, okay. And here we go to the single point control. Now this is something that's been argued a lot. You know, what on earth are you talking about, David? Well, there it is. Okay, and at the top, the competence over all of the areas in the EU Defence Union lay with that lady, Federica Mogherini, a fellow of the Marshall Fund. We go straight back to Avril Harriman and the Marshall Fund, the money. So she's going to tell all our lads and lasses to jump to. Not the Queen, not the Prime Minister, not anybody in Parliament, not you. This lady, unelected, unaccountable. Can't remove her. She's been appointed by who knows. So, parliamentary issues. What is the competence of Parliament currently? I would say that there really isn't any, and this is our problem. So we found out over the last couple of weeks with the revelations we've been working on with King Mark Sedwell I, that the Cabinet Office are running the committees. The committees are not run by the MPs. The committees are run by the Cabinet Office. So, I mean, it's just staggering, isn't it? So you've got no chance to get it into committee. Is Britain involved? Oh, yes. So, here we go again. Listen to him. I know this is the reaction, but listen to him.
You see, the European defence concept actually was started by a summit between myself and President Chirac back in the year 2000.
There you go. Ownership. Tony Blair at the Munich Defence Conference claiming ownership of initiating the concept that Maggie Thatcher said no to. He's green-lighted it. It's been all the way through his term of office, carried on under Cameron, carried on under May. No difference. You can't view Conservative and Labour anymore in any kind of fashion. This is just EU, and the leadership is EU. It's a handful of Leave MPs. They're not in the majority. The whip hand is obviously with the EU leadership. Now, this is a tremendous picture. So, I hope you can see the dynamic here of are we involved? Yes, we are. That's the first Sea Lord of the Royal Navy, Admiral Sir Philip Jones. The two gentlemen either side of him are both generals in the Royal Marines. And this is a celebration for EU NAVFOR, EU Navy, which used to be, it's in a transition at the moment, it was run from Northwood, Royal Navy Nuclear Headquarters, Joint Headquarters. So EU Navy was in Northwood, Royal Navy. All this has been going on whilst Brexit, and they've been talking about we're going to veto headquarters and we're going to not have this. It's already existed. EU Navy had a command and control centre there in Northwood, and there are 3 others. They had the HQs already. How do I know this? Because the Royal Navy officer that built them told me. They were built by the Royal Navy. One in Paris, one in Potsdam, and there's another one in Greece. And they can run and effect full pan-EU mobilisation and unification of the military and operate in 12 to 24 hours. Go, done. They just need the order from Federica Mogherini, and which we now know that that meeting has just taken place, that they're quite happy to sign the bureaucratic chits and actually do it, and they've got the capability to do it. So there are no technical difficulties in not doing it. You can see the EU flags. There's an Admiralty flag there because it's got a gold ribbon. The back is a picture of Margaret Thatcher at the planning meeting for the Falklands with all the staff there. How apt, isn't it? You can't get a better chiaroscura than this image of we're in this, and nobody said a dicky bird. This is a terrific thing, another one that was fed to me from inside the Tory party. They tried to get it into the Express, and the Express wouldn't do anything with it. However, the UK column did, and the reaction, once again, that we're seeing is we tend to put this stuff out when we get it, and all of a sudden it takes off. This is 3-para. Note the EU insignia. This is in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it's an EU command and controlled operation. It's lovely, isn't it? We're going to veto the EU army. They tell you all this stuff. Well, that's because we're in defence union, and they're doing it. Interestingly, being moved by an Antonov. Remarkable, isn't it? British Land Rovers in an Antonov. So we had a bit of a hit with this because there were some great graphics that we lifted out of there with the insignia. So we ended up with a bit of a whiplash, but this happened at the same time. So it's not very loud, so listen very carefully.
Can I just ask about our process and the PESCO process? The PESCO process is increasing, and our armed services are being taken over by Europe, and nothing is being done.
Okay.
This took a bit of doing. David Davis there said, at the question of our armed services being taken over by the EU next year, they will be being taken over by the EU. They will be next year. David Davis, he knew. Now I can corroborate that because I met him in between Downing Street and Portcullis House, because I'd been trying to get at him for quite a while, and they're very good at not taking meetings and all the rest of it. But I thought, well, there's no other way of doing this. I'm just going to have to get face to face. So I got face to face with him. Hello, David. You know, Dave Ellis, Strategic Defence Initiative. Need to talk to you. I've had a lot of officers talking to me about something. Oh, right. Okay. Need to talk to you about Defence Union. And he ran instantly. This guy knows all about this. He has to. Otherwise, why would he run? So anecdotally, of course, I had this with Nigel Farage. I'd had a very keen admiral say, well, what's Farage going to do with all this? I'll go and find out. So I went toe-to-toe. He wouldn't take a meeting either. Kept batting me away, loads of nonsense. Gave up in the end, and I went face-to-face with him at the bar at the launch of the Grassroots Out campaign in Kettering. So I got through his bootneck bodyguard, and Nigel, how you doing? Need to talk to you about Defence Union. And he ran. So you want to leave? Really? Here we go.
Will continue its work to increase our prosperity, guarantee our security, and to strengthen our union.
There we go. When Theresa May says security, she means Defence Union. You'll see her do it in Parliament at the dispatch box all the while. This is the coded language. It seems to have stopped on security. In the previous 2 years, it rotated weekly from all different words. I won't bore you with them, but take my word for it, that's what they were doing. Nobody could lock on because they wouldn't use the same words. But she seems to have settled on security. So here, Brian did this. Well, here they go, the twins, the terrible twins. So when Theresa May says security, what does she mean? Okay, so this is the exit in the EU official government document, and with the tremendous work that Mike, Brian, and I, and everybody at the UK column are doing, all credit to them. It is a team effort. This is what we've come up with. Civilian is in. Okay, defence and intelligence. So there's all the intelligence services. And the thematic and co-cooperation, cyber, health, civil contingencies. There's a key one, because we're going to see a bit more of that later on with David's talk as to why that's important. This guy is Francois Fischer. He's the head of EU intelligence. He runs the EU intelligence centre in the EU. Okay? listen.
So, in the intelligence and security sector, UK will not leave. It's a big secret, but you will not leave.
What do you think of that? Well, it was a recording. He didn't know he was being recorded for obvious reasons. So in the defence and security sector, you will not leave. This may be a secret. You will not leave. Need to listen. So we go back to Mrs. May, and she's articulating here a bit to do with the PESCO thing. Don't get too hung up on the acronym side of this job. Just use the phrase Defence Union. It's far easier. People understand what that means very quickly. It's a very important thing in terms of taking anything away with you. Just use the phrase Defence Union. But what she's going into here is some of the granular detail on defence and security. And it's unprecedented, what she's talking about, because Defence Union is indeed unprecedented. So the future partnership in the future document, okay, it is woven, the political policy is woven through like DNA in this document. It's not on one page, it is literally woven through. It's incredibly difficult to sift and spot it. So we have NATO, okay, there's a factor. So there we go, we're in, okay, the bilateral's in, we already know that. Future relationship, security partnership. We will be in the European Defence Agency and permanent structured cooperation. We're in, it's in the black and white, okay? There we go. All that lot, we're in that. Common and defence security policy, in the UK's involvement, we're in that. There you go, there's that. It's in there, this is the truth, this is there, go and check it, okay? So in terms of operational headquarters, which we already know, some of them already exist, and all of the other granular detail there. Britain is in Defence Union, and not a word has been said in Parliament. Not a word. Well, this is the kind of strong language. So we did a vox pop on the UK column Twitter feed. Should Her Majesty's Armed Forces be part of EU Defence Union? Well, I think that's pretty conclusive. There's near enough 1,900 people voted, and the results are massive. Now, I should think anybody that wanted to get elected on some kind of mandate, do you think they would find a majority? Do you think a politician could find a majority with this? It's like hitting a cow's backside with a banjo, surely. So why is Parliament quiet? So we're asking a question now. Why won't they talk about this? Okay? So is this some kind of D-notice? How are they doing it? What's the system? How are they all quiet? Through the whips. There's an avenue there, definitely. But I think there's probably... Well, they are afraid. I'll agree with you on that. So we have Parliament in effectively silence, and so what is the competence of Parliament over defence? We have a lot of people, a lot of MPs talk about parliamentary competence, and of course, well, doesn't seem to be any over this issue, and this is a huge amount of money and a huge issue to the nation as to who is effectively going to have competence and command and control over our military. So this is, I'm just going to submit this as a bit of light relief. So we're going to suggest that this is the conversation between King Mark Sedwell and Gavin Williamson.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
You're sacked.
Hal? Hal? Hal?
So there we are. Here we go. King Mark Sedwell sitting on the throne there. This guy seems to have absolute power in the Cabinet Office, which is, as I said, the engine room technically at the moment. And he has competence over so much, it is staggering. So we're sort of submitting this as a sort of question, really, that, you know, this is a matter of, you know, they want to they have a topping out ceremony of Defence Union next year, so make no bones about it, this is real and it's happening, and it concerns all of us. So what on earth is this going to do? Well, if they unify all the nations and they've got all the military, you know, hang on, who's the threat, you know? They're going to go into Russia? Correct. That was incidentally one of the comments that Norman Tebbit made to me. He said, you do realise, David, they will use this internally as well as externally, and I completely agree. So there you go. There's the European Defence Union. We're in it, and this is one of the key things I believe that we've got to campaign against. And I'm suggesting that we can join the absolute betrayal of Brexit and the betrayal of our veterans in the way that they're being legally pursued for something that they were asked to do by the government. Now, I'm reliably informed that the Soldier F and Soldier B, and there was originally, when it was first sort of talked about, that there would be another 30 paras that were going to be pursued. That figure seems to be escalating. But I can come in at it from another angle, from discussions that I've had with some quite senior lawyers who used to fight the MOD on behalf of veterans that were injured. And what they were discussing with me, as well as the Defence Union, because it was something they weren't aware of, and obviously the legal changes, this would be Napoleonic law as the entity, it won't be British law, was the structuring and gearing that they were finding for the MOD were doing, putting in place to pursue veterans, and they were saying it is staggering, it is escalating, and they are gearing up for rump cases. Soldier F and Soldier B are not the rump cases, they are just for openers. And I'm submitting to everyone in Britain that this is the brand destruction, the attempt to destroy the morale within our military, our own military, and the recruiting thereof of our own forces. And it has to be conjoined in the same time frame to make sense of the problem with Defence Union. So we've got to go, so pursuit of veterans and all of the other issues with Defence Union. So if you talk to a vet, try and talk to them, please, about Defence Union and the legal pursuit in the same frame, because it's all happening together. So there is definitely a symbiance. So there you go. There's the Pantheon and the Roman Temple of Mars. And this is where we come full circle back to this resurgence of this empire and some of the fundamentals that we're involved with. So I just want to really emphasize one thing, that when you take away from the meeting here today, and there's going to be a briefing later on with David that's going to dovetail in amazingly well with the Africa angle, and he's going to give you some tremendous detail as to why that's now a factor. We had a discussion last night in the bar, and of course the two subjects dovetail and overlap perfectly, that the EU going into Africa militarily on some kind of intervention policy, and the reasons why. So I'd really like to just sort of sum up and close now that whatever you do in terms of trying to interface with the MPs on this, please do it formally. And if it's possible, do it in groups, team up, and keep your initial questions short. And may I suggest something like this? What is EU Defence Union going to cost? Don't get into an elaborate questions with them. They seem to bat them away very, very easily. We're finding a tremendous amount of success on Twitter collectively at the UK column with our Thursday morning Twitter barrage. So if any of you do have Twitter feeds, look out for what Mike Robinson and I are doing and Brian Gerrish on a Thursday lunchtime. And if you can, retweet, because we seem to have got a formula going there where we flood the MPs' Twitter boxes with a huge amount of traffic. And a lot of the discussions I've had with people here today are about, what kind of threshold levels, what's the criticality do we need in order, collectively as a sort of people saying no to this, to actually affect a result. And having had the experience of working within a local party association and seeing what the MP reacted to, that they viewed 1 letter as 1,000, 10 letters, we have to do something, okay? So there must be some correlation with Twitter if you find that easier or whatever, but this cannot be an internal conversation amongst ourselves or amongst the Leave, the general Leave community. It has to be an external conversation with the people that can actually put some sort of resistance up, which is your MP. So regardless of the party, forget that, get in face to face and have as much of a possible go as you can, because they're looking to complete this next year. And there's only one thing going to happen. This thing is going to go to war, and it's going to conscript, and it's going to be expensive. It concerns everyone. Thank you very much indeed.